John Malcolm joins you now, who's vice president of the Institute for Constitutional Government at the Heritage Foundation. He's also at the Meese Center. John, it's good to have you back on the program.
Good to be with you, Lars.
So let's start with the thing you wrote about for Heritage, and that is whether Congress should be involved in police reform at all.
Well, look, I think you're correct that a lot of police reforms over the years have been developed at the state and local level. I mean, some of the best developments in policing, for instance, were done under, Police Chief Bill Bratton in New York, coming up with CompStat, sort of figuring out hotspot policing. There are a lot more police officers in a lot more communities than there are FBI agents and other federal agents in the federal government. So you are right about all of that. That having been said, there is a certain amount of expertise that lies at the federal level. They have a lot of contacts at the Department of Justice with police forces all around the country. They can gather a lot of data that a local police agency can't do about some things that work and don't work. So I certainly agree with you that the federal government should in no way, shape, or form be heavy-handed in terms of what they try to force upon local police forces. But when it comes to things like credentialing, best practices, coming up with grant funds for training, the federal government can be of great assistance.
No, and I'm not denying any of that. In fact, if anything, I like the idea of, say, a federal floor, saying that if anybody in America is going to call himself or herself a cop, that there should be a bare minimum, maybe not even a bare minimum, just a minimum level of training and expertise that's expected before you put on the badge and put on the gun. And then if a local community says, oh, no, we want to go far beyond that, they can go beyond it. They just can't go below it. Those kinds of things. And it may even be appropriate for the federal government to say certain kinds of things. In this case, the obvious one that's currently being discussed is chokeholds or sleeper holds or carotid holds. Should they be banned at the federal level and just say that is not allowed anywhere in America? But then you take that choice away from the local department who says, we've used sleeper holds and control holds very effectively. We haven't hurt anybody. We haven't killed anybody. And now you're taking a tool away, and the tool doesn't have a clear replacement. So what do you want us to do? And Congress says, that's not our problem. That's your problem now.
Yeah, no, look, that's right. And one of the things about Congress having a very heavy hand is that they have a lot of money, so they can either offer you great inducements by offering you more money, or big threats by threatening to take away funds. I mean, there are a lot of police forces. I mean, chokeholds, since you picked that, I mean, we could have talked about no-knock warrants. I mean, any number of things.
Oh, you do that one, too.
Sure. I mean, look, there are a lot of police forces that have already banned chokeholds. The House bill absolutely creates a federal ban on chokeholds, and the Senate bill says, look, we should study this issue. Chokeholds should certainly be allowed whenever deadly force is allowed. I mean, if a police officer is threatened with grievous bodily injury and he would be authorized, if he wanted to take out his gun, he can certainly use a type of deadly force less than that. But other than that, we need to at least figure out when might be appropriate circumstances to use it, and perhaps even study instances in which it is invoked. I mean, clearly what Officer, this guy Derek Chauvin did, that was not a legitimate chokehold, in my opinion. That was murder. But there have been other very sad incidents involving Eric Garner and whatnot, in which police were using chokeholds, and it had tragic consequences. So one should study that issue. But I agree with you that the federal government coming in and saying thou shalt do this and thou shalt not do that can often end up having very, very tragic consequences, in fact.
John Malcolm is with me from Heritage. Let me throw one at you since you brought up Eric Garner's name. He's the man who is selling what are called in New York Lucy's, because New York has stratospheric cigarette taxes. I don't smoke cigarettes, so I don't have a dog in the fight. But they have the police effectively acting as revenue agents by going out and enforcing the rule that says you can't go to New Jersey and buy a lower tax pack of cigarettes and then sell them two at a time on the streets of New York. An activity that, as I understand, is about as common in New York City as anything else you'd see in New York City, and that's what they went after Eric Garner for. And, of course, he resisted arrest. Don't know why, even though he'd been arrested about a couple of dozen times before. But should say the federal government say you can't use your local police department as a revenue agent?
Well, that raises an entirely different area, which is what should be a crime. I mean, what should be a regulatory offense or a civil violation at best, and what do we, turn into a crime where guys with guns and badges go out and enforce it. That is a discussion that has been going on for a long time and will continue. I would note that Texas Representative Chip Roy has just introduced a bill called the Count the Crimes to Cut the Crimes Act that basically asks the federal government and every regulatory agency to identify every crime, both statutory and regulatory, how often it's been invoked and what the mens rea standard is, with the goal that there would then be a review of these things to figure out where they ought to be cut. States and local authorities like New York, with respect to Lucy's, ought to do the same thing. That is really less, how the police do what they do than more the issue of when are the police called upon to do what they do. And certainly the police are called upon to do an awful lot, including enforcing an awful lot of laws that probably ought not to be crimes.
Well, and you know why they wanted to take him into custody, because if the city of New York just said, hey, write tickets for Lucy's, you know what the sellers of Lucy's would do with the tickets? They'd probably use them for toilet paper. They just say, thanks for the ticket. I'm not paying it anyway, so why do I care? So they tell them, arrest the guy. And because they try to arrest the guy, and then he bizarrely decides to resist arrest, then you end up with a man who's dead. But in any case, that's another set of issues. The no-knocks. Now, I'll tell you, as a reporter, I've been along on some no-knock raids, or raids that were so close to it where the police would show up at the door of a drug dealer and say they know he's armed, or they expect that he's armed, and they bang, they shout police, and the door goes down, a half a second later. And they said this is actually safer for us and safer for the suspect. But in this case, it ended up with the police murdering some people. At least that's the allegation, because they went to a person who never should have been the subject. So it's not, do you ban the no-knock warrant, but do you say there's an absolute level of certainty you have to have before you go bang somebody's door down, that you have to know exactly, who you're going after. And it can't be, I think this person might be armed and might be dangerous.
Well, the absolute certainty certainly ought to be that you have the right address.
Exactly.
That is in the warrant. I mean, so, of course, it was a tragic circumstance with this Breonna Taylor, where the police did a no-knock warrant. They burst in. She or it was her or boyfriend, I don't remember who, had a firearm, who thought, I have intruders coming into my home. They haven't told me who they are. I'm allowed to protect myself from my home. It's legitimate self-defense. This happened. Yep. The police shot her, and they missed shooting at the police officer. They would have been justified in killing the police officer because they didn't know who was coming into their home. I certainly agree that no-knock warrants should not be issued, as I gather they might be in some places, as a sort of a matter of course. When the police are going in to execute a warrant, they are given a no-knock warrant. I've even been told that sometimes they are given a no-knock warrant even by judges, even when they don't request them.
And that makes no sense at all. John Malcolm from Heritage. John, thanks very much.